My parents begged me to come home for Thanksgiving after they took my college fund to pay for my sister. My name is Michelle, and by most standards, I'd say I've done well for myself. At 26, I work as an investment manager at one of the top firms in the city. I have a decent apartment rented but comfortable and enough savings to finally buy my own place soon. No mortgage, no loans, just the way I planned. Everything in my life was moving according to schedule until Aunt Sarah's phone call changed. "Everything, Michelle honey, are you coming for Thanksgiving this year?" Her warm voice instantly softened my mood. Aunt Sarah had always been more of a mother to me than my actual mother ever was. I said, already looking forward to her famous apple pie. Thanksgiving at her house had become my tradition, a safe haven. Far from the people I'd spent years avoiding, what I didn't expect was who else would be there. I should probably explain why my aunt's invitation meant more to me than just a holiday meal. You see, I haven't spoken to my parents or my older sister Jessica in 8 years, not since the night everything fell apart. It was the summer before college. I had just received my acceptance letter, a partial scholarship to study investment management. It was everything I had worked for years of late night, studying part-time jobs and keeping my head down. While Jessica basked in the endless glow of my parents' praise, I rushed home, expecting them to be proud. Instead, my mother barely looked up from her magazine. "We can't pay for your college, Michelle." I remember the way my stomach twisted. "But what about Grandma's money? She left it specifically for my education." "You promised." Dad shifted in his chair. "Uncomfortable things change, honey. Jessica's wedding is more important right now." That was the moment. Everything I had bottled up for years came pouring out, every instance of being overlooked. Every moment I felt like second best, every sacrifice I made while Jessica got everything handed to her. The argument was ugly by the end of the night. I had packed my bags and walked out. I went to the one person who had always treated me like I mattered. Aunt Sarah. She didn't hesitate to take me in. What I didn't know then was that she had been saving money for her own son's education, money that she offered to me instead after he tragically passed in a car accident. I only accepted on one condition. I would pay her back every penny once I graduated and got a job. And I did. College was tough. I worked part-time at a cafe while juggling my coursework and maintaining my scholarship. But I made it through, landed a position at a prestigious investment firm, and 2 years later, I paid back every cent to Aunt Sarah. Life was good. I had my independence. My career was thriving, and I had carefully avoided any contact with my family until now. I almost dropped the pumpkin pie I was carrying when I stepped into Aunt Sarah's house that Thanksgiving. There they were. My parents, my sister Jessica, and her 2 kids all sitting in the living room like they belonged there. 8 years of silence gone in an instant. Aunt Sarah rushed to help me, her eyes apologetic. "I didn't know they were coming, Michelle. They just showed up." I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding. My mother looked older, more gray in her hair than I remembered. My father had gained weight. Jessica, she still looked like the golden child. Even with 2 kids clinging to her arms, I needed air. I turned on my heels and stepped out onto the back porch. The crisp November air biting at my skin, my hands were shaking as I gripped the railing. 8 years. Now they decide to show up, Michelle. My mother's voice behind me made me stiffen. I didn't turn around. "Why are you even here?" She sighed, stepping closer. "Because we were wrong. Your father and I, we've spent years feeling guilty about what we did. We want to make things right." The words felt foreign, like they didn't belong in her mouth. I clenched my jaw. "Then why didn't you call or write or email?" "Anything?" Her voice wavered. "Because we were ashamed." For the first time I turned to look at her. She looked different, smaller, more fragile. "We told ourselves we'd reach out," she continued, "but the more time passed, the harder it became. When we heard you'd be here for Thanksgiving, we knew this might be our only chance." I swallowed hard. My mind racing. Part of me wanted to list every moment they made me feel like nothing. Another part, when I wasn't ready to acknowledge, noticed how tired she looked, how her hands trembled as she spoke. "I need time to think," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is a lot." She nodded quickly. "Course. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready." I wasn't sure if I ever would be for the rest of the evening. I barely spoke. I sat at the farthest end of Aunt Sarah's dining table, picking up my food while my parents and Jessica chatted with other relatives, like nothing had happened. Every so often, I caught Jessica glancing at me, her expression unreadable. My mother too kept looking over, as if expecting me to suddenly change my mind. Welcome them back into my life with open arms. I wasn't ready for that. After dinner, while everyone else was engaged in light conversation, my father cleared his throat. "Michelle," he said, his voice suddenly formal, like he was delivering a business proposal. "We were thinking it would be nice to have a family meeting before we all leave for the night." Aunt Sarah stiffened beside me. "Now," she asked, glancing around at the table still littered with half-eaten pies and coffee cups, "is this really the time? It won't take long?" My mother added, "We just want to talk." I exhaled slowly. Fine, I muttered. Let's talk. They led me into Aunt Sarah's living room away from the others. Jessica followed. Her arms crossed. My parents sat on the couch and I stood, arms folded, waiting. Dad started first. Michelle, we understand why you've been distant. We made mistakes and we regret them. I narrowed my eyes. Which mistakes exactly? There was a pause. Jessica sighed dramatically. Come on, Michelle. You can't seriously still be mad about something that happened 8 years ago. We were all young, and Mom and Dad did what they thought was best at the time. I felt my stomach twist. Best for whom? Dad cleared his throat. Look, we can't change the past, but we can move forward. Jessica is going through a rough time. Don't, I said sharply. Don't make this about Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes. Please. You're acting like you had it so rough you got a scholarship. You had Aunt Sarah's help. Clenched my fists. I worked for everything. I have, Jessica. I had to figure things out on my own because my own parents told me their priority was your wedding. Silence. Mom sighed, rubbing her temples. We're not here to fight. Michelle, we just want to reconnect. Is that why you showed up uninvited to Thanksgiving? I asked because from where I'm standing, this isn't about reconnecting. This is about ambushing. Mom looked taken aback, but Dad kept going. Look, he said, things haven't been easy for us. The economy is tough and your mother lost her job. And Jessica, I held up a hand. Let me guess, you moved back home. Things are hard, and now you will suddenly want me back in your lives. Jessica stiffened. I laughed bitterly. And let me take a wild guess. You're not just here to apologize, you need something from me. Jessica's face turned red, but it was Mom who spoke. That's not fair, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. Isn't it? I shot back. Dad sighed. Michelle, we just thought since you're doing well, you might be willing to help us out a little. Just until things settle. There it was, the real reason they were here. I felt my whole body go cold. Help you out. Mom hesitated. Just a little every month. Something manageable, maybe $1,900. I let out a short, humorous laugh. You didn't help me when I needed you. Now you want me to help you. Jessica crossed her arms. That's what family does. The sheer audacity of it all made my chest tighten. I turned to Aunt Sarah, who was watching quietly from the doorway, her expression unreadable. I thought about every long night I'd spent studying the double shifts at the cafe, the years of struggling, just to prove I could survive on my own. I thought about how they had never once reached out, not when I graduated, not when I got my first job, not when I was building my life from scratch. Now, after 8 years of silence, they wanted my help. I turned back to them, shaking my no. Mom blinked. What? No, I repeated. I'm not giving you money. Jessica scoffed. Come on, Michelle. You make plenty. And I earned every cent. I snapped. Without any of you. Dad's jaw tightened. Michelle, we're your family. I laughed. But it wasn't out of humor. No, you're not. Family's supposed to be there for you. Made it clear where I stood years ago. Mom's face twisted and suddenly the warmth was gone. So that's it. You're just going to turn your back on us. I stared at her. You turned your back on me. First. Jessica muttered something under her breath, shaking her head. Dad looked furious. Mom's lip trembled like she wanted to cry, but I didn't feel sorry for them. I felt free. I turned to Aunt Sarah. I think I'm ready to go home. Now. She nodded, stepping forward and gently placing a hand on my arm. Let's go, sweetheart. I walked past my parents, past Jessica, past the guilt and manipulation they had tried to throw at me. As I reached the door, my mother called out, her voice sharp with anger. You'll regret this. Michelle didn't even look back. Because I knew for the first time in my life I wouldn't. I had almost convinced myself that things would finally quiet down, that after my firm refusal at Thanksgiving, my family would get the message. I was wrong. It started with small things. Jessica sending passive-aggressive texts, my mother leaving voicemails dripping with guilt. Then came the messages from unknown numbers, extended family. Charming and all echoing the same plea. Be reasonable, help your family. But the final straw came 2 weeks later when I logged into my bank account one morning and saw the unauthorized transfer, $10,000 gone. My stomach plummeted. My hands shook as I clicked through my statements, desperately trying to figure out what had happened. Then I saw an automatic transfer set up in my name to my mother's account. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't set this up. A cold wave of realization hit me. My parents had my bank information. I had sent the money before, years ago, back when I was struggling in college and naive enough to think they'd ever reciprocate kindness. I never thought they'd keep my details. I never imagined they'd have the audacity to do this. Rage burned through me, hot and blinding. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the second ring, her voice overly sweet. Michelle, sweetheart, I was just about to call you. What the hell did you do? I snapped. There was a pause. Michelle, lower your tone. I don't appreciate being spoken to like you stole from me. A bit of silence, then a sigh. Sweetheart, it's not stealing. It's family. We needed help, and you've always been so generous. I never agreed to this. I was practically shaking. Now, you weren't picking up our calls, she said, her tone shifting into something more defensive. We had no choice. I laughed bitterly. So your solution was theft. It's not theft, she snapped. It's what families do for each other. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. I couldn't listen anymore. I hung up, grabbed my keys and stormed out. By the time I reached my parents' house, my fury had reached a boiling point. I barely remembered knocking before my mother opened the door looking startled. Michelle, where is it? I pushed past her, storming inside. My father was in the living room looking just as surprised. Jessica was on the couch scrolling through her phone. Mom straightened her voice, turning defensive. You're overreacting. I want my money back. Jessica scoffed. God, Michelle, you act like it's such a big deal. You have money. I turned on her, my voice razor sharp. That doesn't give you the right to take it. Dad exhaled loudly like I was exhausting him. Michelle, let's not be dramatic. No, I turned to face them, all my hands trembling with rage. You took my money without my permission. That's illegal. And if you don't transfer it back today, I'll press charges that got their attention. Mom gasped. You wouldn't dare, Jessica snorted. Over some stupid money. Grow up, Michelle. I felt something inside me snap. That's all I ever was to you, wasn't I? My voice cracked. Bank account. A walking ATM. Mom's expression twisted. You don't understand? No, I do understand. I shook my head, my heart pounding. You never wanted me back. You wanted my money. That's why you suddenly showed up at Thanksgiving. That's why you kept pushing, kept guilt-tripping me. You weren't trying to fix anything. You were just making sure your cash flow didn't run dry. Mom's face reddened, but she didn't deny it. Jessica rolled her eyes, so dramatic. I turned to her, my anger sharper than ever. You knew about this, didn't you? She smirked. Mom and Dad needed help. Honestly, it's your fault for making it so easy. I took a deep breath, my chest heaving. Then I pulled out my phone. I'm calling the bank. Right now, reporting fraud. Mom's eyes widened. Michelle, wait. No, I shook my head. I'm done waiting. I'm done forgiving. Jessica stood up. You're seriously going to ruin our family over this? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You ruined this family a long time ago. Turned and walked to the door. My father finally spoke. Michelle, if you do this, cutting us off for good. Glanced back, meeting his eyes. Good. Then I walked out. By the time I got back to Aunt Sarah's, my hands were still shaking, but a strange sense of relief settled over me. I filed the fraud report that night. 2 days later, the bank confirmed the transfer had been reversed. I had my money back. My parents tried to call. I blocked them. Jessica sent furious texts calling me selfish. I deleted them. I had spent 8 years convincing myself that maybe my family would change. That night I finally accepted the truth. They never would, but I had, and I was never going back. The silence didn't last long. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with missed calls and messages. Mom, Michelle, you're overreacting. Let's talk before you do something you'll regret. Dad, you're making a huge mistake. We're still your parents. Jessica, you are a grateful brat. I hope you enjoy being alone. I read the messages one by one, feeling nothing but a dull ache. I should have expected this. They weren't apologizing, they weren't acknowledging what they'd done, they were just angry they'd been caught. I blocked them all. Still, they found ways to get to me that afternoon. Aunt Sarah answered a call from an unknown number. Before I could stop her, she sighed and handed me the phone. It's your mother. I almost didn't take it, almost let her voice fade into static, but something inside me wanted to hear what she had to say, even if I already knew it wouldn't change anything. I put the phone to my ear. What do you want? She let out a breath as if she was the one who had been wronged. Michelle, you need to fix this. I almost laughed. Fix what? The fact that you stole from me. You can't seriously press charges, she said sharply. Do you know what that would do to us? Maybe you should have thought about that before taking my money. She sighed. Michelle, we're your family. You're willing to throw that all away over a little misunderstanding. My grip on the phone tightened. That wasn't a misunderstanding, mind. It was fraud. She scoffed. You're being so dramatic. Closed my eyes. I could hear Jessica in the background muttering something under her breath. Then Dad's voice cut in. Michelle, he said, his tone firmer. You've always been stubborn, but this is going too far. You owe us for everything we did for you. Something in me snapped. I repeated, my voice dangerously low. Let's talk about what I owe you. I owe you for what exactly? For kicking me out when I was 18. For making me feel like I was never good enough. For only coming back when you wanted my money. Silence. Jessica was the first to recover. You're just bitter. She said. You always have been. I exhaled, slow, suddenly exhausted. What I said, voice steadier. Now maybe I am, but at least I'm done being used. I ended the call. That was the last time I spoke to them. For the first time in years, I felt free. That didn't mean it was easy. The next few days were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, relief, and something else. I couldn't quite name. The weight of years of hope, Disappointment and resentment settled into my chest like a stone. Aunt Sarah didn't push me to talk. She was there cooking extra meals, leaving cups of tea by my side, just being there. I don't regret cutting them off. I admitted one night, staring out her window at the city lights. I feel like I should. She nodded knowingly. Because they're your family, I swallowed. Because I spent years waiting for them to change. She squeezed my hand. And now I took a deep breath. Now I'm done waiting. The next week I threw myself into work. I met with my realtor again, finalizing the purchase of my new apartment. I hope you're excited, she said, as she handed me the paperwork. I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. I am by the weekend. Aunt Sarah helped me move in the moment I stepped into my new place. My place. I knew I had made the right choice. The city stretched out beyond my floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights twinkling like stars. I sat down a box and just breathed. No guilt, no obligation, just freedom. That night, I did something impulsive. I took a photo of myself in my new living room, the skyline behind me, and posted it on social media, with a simple caption, "Dreams do come true." I knew they'd see it. I didn't care. 2 days later, Jessica tried one last time, a single text. "You think you've won? Don't you enjoy your lonely life, Michelle? You'll regret this one day." I stared at it for a moment. Then without hesitation I deleted the message. No anger, no sadness, just peace. I had nothing left to regret. The following Sunday, Aunt Sarah came over for dinner. I cooked her favorite lasagna and we sat on my balcony sipping wine as the city hummed beneath us. "Are you happy?" she asked, studying me carefully. I thought about it for a moment. Then I smiled. "I think I finally am." She clinked her glass against mine. "To new beginnings?" And for the first time in years I believed it. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into a new life, one that belonged only to me. For the first time in years, I woke up without the weight of expectation pressing on my chest. No unanswered texts filled with guilt. No late-night phone calls demanding more from me. My days were mine. Again, my decisions belonged to me. It was liberating. My new apartment quickly became a reflection of that freedom. I spent my evenings arranging furniture, picking out art for the walls, finally unpacking the little things I'd accumulated over the years. Things I never let myself fully enjoy, because in the back of my mind, I had always been preparing for them to come back. Now there was no need for that. One night, as I lit a candle in my new living room, I realized something strange. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at my parents, not at Jessica. I didn't forgive them, not in the way they probably wanted me to. But I no longer felt the bitterness tightening in my chest when I thought about them. They were part of my past. I was finally at peace with leaving them. Aunt Sarah, ever the unwavering presence in my life, visited often. "So what's next?" she asked over coffee one morning, a playful glint in her eye. I smiled. "I'm not sure, and that's the best part." For the first time I wasn't following someone else's plan. I wasn't proving myself to anyone. I was simply living. I was happy. I kept hearing about my parents through mutual acquaintances. Apparently my mother had started working part-time at a bookstore after realizing I wasn't coming back to rescue them financially. Jessica predictably was furious, complaining to anyone who would listen about how selfish I was. It didn't matter. They had shown me who they were. I had listened and I had moved on. The last time I saw them, if you could even call it that, by accident, I was in a cafe downtown waiting for Aunt Sarah. When I spotted them across the street, my parents, Jessica, for the first time in years I saw them not as the family I had lost, but as people flawed, imperfect, no longer holding any power over me. I expected my heart to ache, to feel that familiar pull of regret. But I felt nothing. I took a sip of my coffee and turned away. Months passed, and life moved forward in the best way. At work I got promoted. My hard-earned success was finally leading me to bigger opportunities. This time I was embracing them without the nagging feeling that I needed to hold back. I traveled, something I'd never done just for myself before, a weekend trip to the coast, a last-minute getaway to the mountains. When Christmas rolled around, I spent it exactly where I wanted to be, curled up on Aunt Sarah's couch, watching movies, eating too many cookies and laughing until my stomach hurt. "I'm proud of you," she said, softly squeezing my hand. For once I didn't deflect, I didn't downplay it, I simply smiled. "I'm proud of me too." The biggest lesson I learned: family isn't about blood, it's about choice. It's about the people who show up for you, who love you without conditions, who don't keep a scorecard of what you owe them. I used to think I had to fight for my parents' approval. That maybe if I just tried harder, they'd finally love me the way I needed them to. But love shouldn't have to be earned. And walking away, it wasn't weakness. It was strength. One evening as I stood on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I didn't have to check. I knew it was them. I stared at it from then with the same calm certainty that had carried me through these past months. I pressed delete, no hesitation, no regret. I turned back to my quiet, beautiful home, my safe haven. The life I had built for myself. For the first time, I felt it freedom, and it felt good. Story 2. My name is Elena, and I'm 41 for the past 19 years. I've been cleaning corporate officers, not the most glamorous job I know, but it's honest work. It's been good to me. I started young right out of high school. Actually, Mom got sick. You see, it was just the three of us, Mom, my little brother Danny, and me. Mom was a single parent working her tail off to keep a roof over our heads. When she got sick, everything changed. I had to put my own life on hold, drop out of school, and take care of her doctor's appointments, helping around the house, the whole 9 yards. This janitorial gig was perfect, flexible hours, understanding bosses. It let me be there for Mom when she needed me most. It's funny how things work out though. Mom passed away when I was 21, Danny was just 16. Suddenly this job wasn't just a temporary fix anymore. It was my life. The folks at work were amazing. Elena, honey, take all the time you need. They'd say, but grief is a funny thing. All I wanted to do was crawl into a hole and disappear. But I had Danny to think about. He'd lost Mom. He was still in school. I couldn't fall apart. I kept going one foot in front of the other day. After day, I took care of Danny, paid for his books, drove him to his late classes, even bought him a new suit when he landed his first real job. It wasn't much, but it was all I could do. I was trying to be both sister and mom all rolled into one. Once Danny started working, he'd give me this look. Sometimes, why don't you get a better job, Elaine? He'd ask, why are you still cleaning toilets? I knew he was embarrassed by me, by our tiny apartment, by the fact that I wasn't some high-powered executive. Like the people he worked with, it stung, especially coming from him. I held my tongue. I loved my job. I loved the people I worked with. They were my family. And then came the day. Danny landed a job at some big-shot corporation, the kind you see advertised on TV, with fancy offices and even fancier salaries. His starting salary was practically double mine. He was ecstatic. Look at this, Elena. I've already surpassed you. Check out this bonus. He was like a kid in a candy store. Elena, quit your job. Get a real job like mine. He'd say, hey, watch how you talk to me. I'd reply, I like my job. Quit making excuses. He'd argue our salaries are on completely different levels. I wish he hadn't said that. I was happy for him. Truly, I was. But there was this edge to his voice, this disdain. I could see him changing, becoming someone I didn't quite recognize. It started subtly, a condescending comment here, a snide remark there. He'd talk about his prestigious colleagues, the incompetence of others. It was like he was looking down his nose at the whole world, not just the people he worked with. I tried to warn him, Danny, I'd say everyone starts somewhere. You're new to the game just like everyone else was once. Elena, he'd scoff, you're so naive. You wouldn't understand. You're just a janitor with a high school education. I've been working longer than you, I'd retort. I can tell you there's not that much difference between people. Really, he'd sneer. Do you have any Ivy League graduates working at your cleaning company? Why don't you go lecture them about wasting their lives? He was impossible. I thought the real world would knock some sense into him, but it seemed to have the opposite effect. The more successful he became, the more arrogant he got. It wasn't just about the money yet. It was like he genuinely believed he was better than everyone else. Years passed. I kept cleaning offices. Danny kept climbing the corporate ladder, and the chasm between us kept growing wider. Then he met Sarah. She was a lot like Danny, young, ambitious, and with a healthy dose of superiority complex. The first time I met her, she looked me up and down and said, "You really are a janitor." I replied, "And I enjoy my work." "Really?" she said, her nose wrinkling. "Isn't it dirty?" Before I could answer, Danny chimed in. "It's unimaginable, isn't it? Unsanitary? And she's not exactly attractive, no money either, but what can I do? She's family." I was speechless after Sarah left. I let Danny have it. What was that about? She's family, so it can't be helped. What's with her attitude? You can't judge people based on their jobs. Shut up, Elena. He snapped. I'm a college graduate. Sarah is a college graduate. You dropped out of high school. We can't help but look down on you. You're the one with the low-level job. The one living a loser life. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He knew why I'd left school. He knew about Mom. He knew I'd sacrificed everything for him. And this was the thanks I got. I looked at myself in the mirror that night. He'd called me ugly, wasn't blind. I knew I wasn't beautiful, but ugly. Maybe I should start taking better care of myself, I thought. Maybe if I dressed up, if I wore makeup, he'd see me differently, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. Danny and Sarah were two peas in a pod. That arrogance was a shared disease, and it was only going to get worse. One day I got a postcard. Danny and Sarah had moved into a fancy new house, of course. They hadn't even bothered to tell me. I called them partly to congratulate them, partly because I had news of my own. "I got your postcard," I said. "Amazing house. Pretty impressive, right?" Danny bragged, "All thanks to my hard work. I'm a fast tracker. Couldn't have done it without my talent." "Amazing," I said, letting him have his moment. Then I took a deep breath. Listen, I have something to tell you too. My company just got a new contract to clean your office building. We might run into each other. Good for you. He said, his voice dripping with condescension. Wouldn't want you setting foot in such a prestigious building otherwise, right? He paused, then added, one more thing, I have a boyfriend now. Seriously, I was genuinely surprised. Yeah, I said he's older and he's wonderful. After what you said, I started taking better care of myself. He fell for me. I was half joking, but Danny, ever the narcissist, took full credit. I guess I played a part in that. He chuckled. Something like that, I said, rolling my eyes. Anyway, we wanted to come visit your new place, bring a housewarming gift. Visit. His voice suddenly turned cold. You do realize what your job is, right? What are you talking about? I have a new house, Elena. It's clean. I don't want some filthy janitor tracing through it. You understand, right? My blood ran cold. Filthy. Are you serious? Is that all you think of me, of my colleagues? Come on, Elena, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. Don't be so sensitive. It's common sense. You work with dirt. You shouldn't be visiting people's homes. That's rude. Apologize, I shouted, my voice shaking with anger. Rude? Apologize? What the hell, Elaine? You're the one with the low-level job, the one with no education. You're the one living a loser life. Something inside me snapped. You're unbelievable. You think you're better than everyone else just because you have a fancy job and a big house. You're pathetic, pathetic and pathetic. You're the one who's pathetic. Your boyfriend must be a real loser if he can't find anyone better than a cleaning lady. If you weren't my brother, if you weren't my sister, I wouldn't even talk to you. The line went dead. I sat there, tears streaming down my face. He was right. We were done. He was the only family I had left. He'd thrown me away like yesterday's trash. Because of my job. A few months later, I found myself on a familiar route. My company had been contracted to clean Danny's office building. Ironic, wasn't it? Part of me dreaded it. Another part of me, I was curious. I wanted to see him in his element, the high-powered executive in his natural habitat. The building was massive, all glass and steel. Surely I could avoid him in this labyrinth. I focused on my work, pushing my cart down the endless corridors, lost in the rhythm of mopping and dusting. One afternoon, I was cleaning near the vending machines when I overheard a group of men talking. One of them, younger than the others, was getting a serious dressing down. This is the third time this quarter, John. Your colleagues are leading teams, managing projects. You're still making these rookie mistakes. I'm sorry, sir, the young man mumbled. Sorry isn't enough. You need to step up your game. As they walked past me, I recognized him. John Dan, my little brother, the fast tracker, the one who looked down on everyone, was getting reamed out like a first-year intern. He looked pale, defeated. He didn't even notice me. It was a strange feeling, pity, maybe schadenfreude. I didn't know. All I knew was that the Danny I saw that day was a far cry from the arrogant, self-assured man I knew. A few days later, I was cleaning the lobby when Danny came rushing out of the elevator. Damn it, I left the samples upstairs. He said to his colleague, I'll go get them. No, Mr. Miller, I'll go. The colleague said, you wait here, you're useless anywhere, Danny muttered. But when you get promoted, you take care of me, okay? The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. This was my brother, the one who lectured me about loser lives. He was the one scrambling, making excuses, relying on others to clean up his messes. As I was pruning the lobby plants, my colleague, bless her heart, whispered, Isn't that your brother? I sighed. Seems like he's having a rough time, poor guy. She said, shaking her head. Danny must have overheard us. He stormed over, his face red with anger. What are you doing here? He hissed. Working, I said, calm. Don't you dare tell Sarah about this. You hear me? Tell her what? That you forgot your samples, that you're not as successful as you pretend to be. Shut up. He shouted. You're just a janitor. You don't understand anything, and you do. I asked, raising an eyebrow. You're the one who's lying to his wife, relying on others to do your work and insulting everyone in sight. Just then a voice boomed from behind us. That's enough. Apologize to your sister. This instant. We both turned to see a distinguished-looking older man, impeccably dressed, standing beside. He put a hand on my back and glared at Danny. Who are you? Danny spotted. I'm the one dating your sister. The man said, Come, and I won't tolerate you speaking to her that way. Danny's jaw dropped. You're dating her, the man said, his voice firm, and for your information, I'm the executive vice president of this company. I'm also on the board of directors. So I suggest you watch your tone. Danny looked like he was about to faint. He staggered an apology, his voice barely a whisper. Later, I learned that Danny had been transferred to a remote branch. He'd panicked after his colleagues overheard him insulting me, and he'd made a series of costly mistakes. Sarah came to me, begging me to use my influence to get him transferred back. I refused. As for me, I married the executive vice president. We built a beautiful house, and I'm still cleaning offices, but not just any officers. I'm the president of the company. Now the old president retired. He chose me as his successor. It's a lot of responsibility, but I'm ready for it. I'm still Elena, the janitor, but I'm also Elena, the president. I'm not ashamed of either. I've learned that a person's worth isn't measured by their job title or their salary. It's measured by their character, their kindness, and their willingness to work hard, no matter what life throws their way. That's a lesson my brother with all his fancy degrees and his high-paying job could never seem to grasp.